Hello friends, welcome to my YouTube channel. The topic for today is ventricles or in brain. Okay, because most of the students don't understand that what are ventricles in brain. So I decided for that today I will discuss about this topic, and also I will highlight the cerebrospinal fluid. So for today our discussion is on the ventricles in brain and also on the cerebrospinal fluid. So let's start. Ventricles are the mainly hollow space, the cavities. Okay, so four interconnected hollow space or cavities of brain. They produce the cerebrospinal fluid and also transport the cerebrospinal fluid to the brain and also to the spinal cord. Okay, so if we look at this picture, this is the lateral view of our brain, and here by the color I am showing you the ventricles only. Okay, so this is the orange part. This is the lateral ventricles, because ventricles of brain is divided into four ventricles are there. Ventricles divided into four. First and second are lateral ventricles. Next there is a third ventricle, and fourth ventricle. So ventricles are what? They are the hollow space cavities inside the brain, and they are mainly comprised with the formation of cerebrospinal fluid. They produce cerebrospinal fluid, and these ventricles are lined by the ependydymal cell. The ependydymal cells are the cells that are lined by the choroid plexus. Okay, I am explaining all the terms. So I have told you that the ventricles are responsible for the formation of cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, so inside the ventricle there are a bunch of capillaries, blood capillaries. This bunch of blood capillaries called the choroid plexus. Choroid plexus. Okay, and these capillaries are lined by a cell called the ependydymal cells. They all together form the choroid plexus, and they help in the formation of the cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, let's come its parts. So look at this diagram. It's a lateral view. This she-shaped. As it's a lateral view, so we can find one part of the ventricle. Okay, the lateral ventricles are two in parts, first and second. Here we can find the one part, and another part is on the opposite side. Okay, so this is one part. This C-shape is a lateral ventricle. This is lateral ventricle. Lateral ventricle. Okay, and this is connected with this one is the third ventricle. First and second is on the opposite direction, so first and second both form the lateral ventricles, and these lateral ventricles are present in the two hemispheres, because we know that within our brain, cerebrum has two hemispheres, right hemisphere and left hemisphere. And lateral ventricles, that means the right ventricles situated in the right cerebral hemisphere, and left ventricle is situated in the left cerebral hemisphere. So these two ventricles are situated in two hemispheres, right and left. Okay, now this connection, this is called the foramen of Monro. This is called the this connection between the first lateral ventricle and the third ventricle this connection is called foramen of Monro. foramen of Monro, or it's also called the interventricular foramen. Interventricular foramen. Okay, interventricular foramen. So this connects the third ventricle with the lateral ventricle. This is the third ventricle. Okay, third ventricle has three projections. This one, okay, I have to say something about the lateral ventricle, because lateral ventricle is a C in shape. So this is called the anterior or frontal horn. Okay, this part is called anterior or frontal horn, and this part is called the inferior temporal horn. Inferior temporal horn. Okay, now to the, and there is another one, this part, it is called the posterior occipital horn. It's called posterior occipital horn. So lateral hemisphere have three horns, that is anterior frontal horn, one temporal horn, and this one in occipital horn. In these three lobes, this is connected with the three lobes. This is the anterior frontal horn, this is the posterior occipital horn, and the inferior temporal horn. Okay, now there is a third ventricle. This is connected with the lateral ventricle by foramen of Monro or interventricular foramen. This is foramen. Okay, now third ventricle is attached with the fourth ventricle. I colored three ventricles separately. Three means this one is of two, another one is at the opposite direction. So orange, first and second are orange. Third ventricle I colored by blue, and green is the fourth one. So third ventricle is connected with the fourth ventricle by the cerebral aqueduct. So this is the connection between third and fourth. This is called the cerebral aqueduct. Okay, cerebral aqueduct. So these are different parts of ventricle we can find at the lateral view. Let's see the anterior view or front view. So this is the frontal view. This diagram is showing the frontal view of the ventricles. These two are the lateral ventricle. These two lateral ventricles are situated in the respective hemisphere. Right ventricle at the right hemisphere, left ventricle at the left hemisphere. And these two ventricles are attached by a structure. This is called the septum lucidum. This is called septum lucidum. Okay, and these are the two lateral ventricles, first and second lateral ventricles. Now after the first and second, this one is the third ventricle, and this third ventricle is attached with this structure. These are called the intraventricular foramen. This is called the interventricular foramen. Okay, now this is the third ventricle. This is third ventricle. Okay, now third ventricle is attached with the fourth ventricle. This fourth ventricle, the connection between these two ventricles is called the cerebral aqueduct. This is cerebral aqueduct. And then there is a central canal of the spinal cord. It is continue with the central. This is the central canal of spinal cord. Okay. In this diagram, this is the posterior horn, anterior horn, and this is the occipital, anterior or the frontal. Anterior or frontal, posterior or temporal, and occipital. Okay, 3. Posterior or frontal horn. Actually, these 3 horns, lateral ventricle is actually they have these 3 horns. Okay, I am right first. Posterior horn, this one is the frontal, this is the temporal horn, and this one is occipital horn. Okay, so lateral ventricle has 3 horns, and these 3 horns are projects into these 3 part of the brain: frontal, occipital, and temporal. And the volume of the ventricle is increased by the age. Okay, increased with the age. Whenever the person is get age, the ventricle, the space, the volume of the ventricle also increased. Okay, now come to the third ventricle. Third ventricle is actually located below the lateral ventricle, with the connection I have already told you, interventricular foramen. Okay, and another more thing is that third ventricle is attached with the fourth ventricle by these structures, cerebral aqueduct. In some cases, this cerebral aqueduct may obstruct, may block. Whenever the cerebral aqueduct get blocked, the cerebrospinal fluid can't come out through this passage, because it's create a obstruction. It obstruct the pathway. So in that case, the cerebrospinal fluid stored in this region, and in this case the brain become large, and that situation is called the hydrocephalus. That situation is called hydrocephalus. Okay, now come to the fourth ventricle. Fourth ventricle is diamond in shape. Okay, it's diamond in shape, and it is located between the pons and cerebellum. And third ventricle is located between the thalamus. Between this, here the 2 thalamus are located, and between these 2 thalamus, third ventricle is there. And the fourth ventricle is located between the pons and cerebellum. I am showing you at the lateral view. It would be clear on that diagram. Look at this diagram. This is the brain stem, and this is the pons. It's pons, and it's cerebellum. And fourth ventricle is located in between these pons and cerebellum. Okay. and third ventricle is located in between the thalamus, and lateral ventricle is below the thalamus. So the cavity of the third ventricle is located in between the left and right thalamus. So here it's a diamond shaped. Fourth ventricle, it's a diamond shape and it's located between the pons and cerebellum, and it has three small foramina. Foramen term is actually related to the opening, a passage. Okay, so whenever the foramen term is attached with anyone, that means it's a opening. So fourth ventricle has three small opening, two lateral and one median aperture. These two are lateral apertures and one is at the median aperture. So fourth ventricle has three apertures. These two are the median apertures. These are the median apertures, and these two are the lateral aperture. Is a lateral aperture, and this is the middle at the in between these two. So it's a medial median. So it's a median aperture. These apertures helps the cerebrospinal fluid to goes to the subarachnoid space. Okay, down to the fourth ventricle, there is it is continues with the central canal of the spinal cord. Okay, so these are all about the ventricles of our brain. Now come to the cerebrospinal fluid, that is, in short we can say CSF. So CSF, what is CSF? CSF is a clear, colorless and transparent fluid that circulates through ventricles of brain, subarachnoid space, and central canal of spinal cord and central canal of spinal cord. So this is our CSF, cerebrospinal fluid. It is a clear, colorless, transparent fluid that circulates through the ventricles of brain and subarachnoid space and central canal of the spinal cord. Okay. And what is actually the properties CSF has? Its volume is up to 100 to 200 ml. Rate of formation is about 0.3 ml per minute. That means 600 to 700 milliliter per day. Okay, and is a alkaline, that is 7.33, pH is 7.33. Okay, now come its function. What actually CSF does? Functions. First function is a shock absorber. CSF is a shock absorber. That means it protects our brain from injury. Okay, protect our brain from injury. Next one, that is, it creates blood brain barrier. Blood-brain barrier. I have a special video particularly on blood-brain barrier. What is actually blood-brain barrier? How it's formed. So please go through that video. You will be clear about the blood-brain barrier. I am telling you in brief here. Blood-brain barrier is that it doesn't allow all the nutrients, all the materials to come entered into the brain. Cerebrospinal fluid clear a barrier. Okay. It allows selected materials, selected minerals to come inside the brain, and also it pass some toxic substances out of the brain. Okay, so this is acts as a blood-brain barrier. And the third is it helps in the formation of intracranial pressure. Helps in the formation of intracranial pressure. That means it creates a uniform pressure inside the brain. Okay, uniform pressure that helps to protect. It protects the injury. It protects the brain from injury. Okay. Now come its composition. Cerebrospinal fluid is made up of water and solid. So, as it's a fluid, so water content is more. Water is up to 99.13% and solids are 0.87%. Okay, so the main composition of the CSF is it contains water and solid. Water is more as it's a fluid. So now come to the solid. What kind of solids are available? Solids are also divided into organic substance and inorganic substances. Okay. Organic substances, inorganic substances, inorganic substances. Organic substances are proteins, amino acids, sugar, cholesterol, urea, uric acid, creatinine and lactic acid. Okay, and inorganic substances are some mineral salts like potassium, magnesium, chloride, phosphate, bicarbonates and sulfates. Okay, so these are the inorganic substances. These mineral salts are available for under the inorganic substance. So these are the main components, the main composition of CSF. Okay, now come how the CSF is formed. That means the formation of CSF. CSF is formed by choroid plexus situated within the ventricles. That is actually choroid plexus is a branching network of capillaries, projections, and covered by pia mater and ependydymal cell. Okay, so these are the choroid plexus is the branch capillaries, and it is surrounded by this capillaries. A portion I am showing here is surrounded by the ependydymal cells. These are the ependydymal cells. These are neuroglial cells. Okay, they form the blood-brain barrier. So they have that cilia here, that cilia helps the cerebrospinal fluid to move through the ventricles. So these ependymal cells are very much important for the movement, for the circulation of the cerebrospinal fluid. So the ependymal cells along with the blood capillaries form the choroid plexus, and the cerebrospinal is formed by the choroid plexus. So now what happened here, it is a blood capillaries, so blood plasma filtered out from the capillaries. Okay, that blood plasma that filtered out, that is the cerebrospinal fluid. Blood plasma filtered out from choroid plexus. As we know that CSF is the extracellular fluid. So as it's the extracellular fluid, so it contains sodium ions. Sodium ions inside. So sodium ions, 3 sodium ions get out of the membrane, and potassium ions, 2 potassium ions get entered within the cells. As it's a extracellular fluid, we know that extracellular fluid is rich in sodium ions. So sodium ions come out, and potassium ion get entered into the cell, and it is generated a action potential. It is the thing is happening here. The sodium entering of the sodium ion and out going of the potassium ion, it is called the active transport. Active transport. Okay, and this incident caused the action potential. Okay. Now come to the circulation of cerebrospinal fluid. This is the front view of our brain. This is the pia mater. It's pia mater, the innermost membrane. Meninges is divided into 3 parts. That is a dura mater. This is arachnoid, and the space between the arachnoid and pia mater is called this space is called subarachnoid space. Subarachnoid space, and dura mater is the outermost layer. So it's the choroid plexus. This is choroid plexus. This is the foramen of Monro. This is third ventricle. These are lateral ventricle. Okay, this is third ventricle. This is cerebral aqueduct. And this is fourth ventricle. And these are 2 lateral aperture and 1 median aperture. Okay, so the cerebrospinal fluid formed here, and it flows through the third ventricle, and by the cerebral aqueduct comes to the fourth ventricle, and from these apertures goes to the subarachnoid space. From the subarachnoid space, it's one way it's come to the spinal cord, and on the other way it goes to follow the subarachnoid space and come to the sinuses. Okay, let's see the steps. Here is the steps. Cerebrospinal fluid circulation. First, formation of cerebrospinal fluid in lateral ventricles. Here in the lateral ventricles, cerebrospinal fluid first form. Then it by the foramen of Monro, that means the intraventricular foramen. it comes to the third ventricle. Next, by the cerebral aqueduct, that is also called the aqueductus sylvius. Okay, it comes to the fourth ventricle. This is the cerebral aqueduct. Come to the fourth ventricle. Fourth ventricle has three apertures. Fourth ventricle has three apertures, two median apertures called the foramen of Lusca. These two apertures, foramen of Lusca, and the median is called the foramen of Magendie. From these apertures through the cisterna magna and cisterna laterals, it comes to the two pathway. One goes to central canal of the spinal cord, and another way on another way it goes to subarachnoid space. Subarachnoid space means to both, to the spinal cord as well as to the brain. Now, at that region, look, there is some projections at the subarachnoid space. There is a projections like villi. These projections or villi is called arachnoid granulation. This villi is called arachnoid granulations. Okay, arachnoid granulations. From the arachnoid granulations, it comes to the superior sagittal sinus or dural sinus. Look at here. What is dural sinus? The dura mater has two layers. One is attached with the meninges with the arachnoid, and another one is touches the bony part. So the meninges part, it creates a notch here. That is called the sinuses, dural sinuses, and this space is called the superior sagittal sinus. Here the cerebrospinal fluid get reabsorbed. Okay, then it get reabsorbed. So this is the total steps of the cerebrospinal fluid circulation. So these are all about the ventricles and the cerebrospinal fluid, that is very much related to the ventricle. That's why I discussed both the topics in one video, because cerebrospinal fluid, it is formed in the ventricles. If my video helped you, then definitely give a like and also subscribe my channel. I will come very soon with new video, new topic. Till then, take care. Thank you for watching.